Viaplay is one of the biggest streaming services in Scandinavia that has been in existence for over 10 years. It's one of those services that we're extremely proud of in the Nordics. We've launched that service for them in 2007 on mobile phones, and it's grown to become one of the biggest streaming services in Scandinavia. We think of it as Netflix in our region of the world. Recently, a couple of weeks ago, we've even launched that service. When we say we, I'm talking as Nordic countries. They've launched their service in Scandinavia and in the rest of the world, including the US. It's huge news in the Nordics, but not so much in the US in itself, because it's not such a big, great deal to launch services globally anymore, because digital services are available pretty much where the internet is available. It's been 10 years since connected TVs have been launched. It's been 100 years since NAB has been going on. And here I am speaking about both of those things and how that affects our industry. My name's Ajey Anand, and I'm the CEO of Norigin Media, and we are a Scandinavian company. We have been in business for close to 2 decades. We do a couple of things well. We provide video hosting services where we downlink content, linear TV, we encode, we package. We understand converting broadcast-grade video content to streaming content as well. We've been in the business for TV apps and front-end engineering for over 10 years, so we understand the multitude of devices that there are and how to engineer perfection on these devices for streaming services. We're a Scandinavian company. We're based in Oslo. And how we differentiate ourselves is the fact that we provide the entire value chain with a couple of our flagship products. It's Cloud Encoder, where we downlink, like I said, encoding content. We create streamable formats. We provide user experience on the other side of things, but all in all, we're engineers who provide consulting services in TV technology for broadcasters and operators around the world. Enough about us. We spoke about Viaplay launching in America, which isn't such big news on this side of the pond. A few years ago, we saw Disney launch around the world, and that was huge news. But I say that how big a news is it? We've seen Netflix do it in over 100 countries. We've seen them do it in a few weeks span. It wasn't a big, great deal because globalization and the technology that allows you to go from one country to the other is quite simple. You're changing the language, of course. You're changing the multi-tenancy aspect of it. Of course, you're catering to the needs of content, the people's language, the CRM, the authentication, and who the user is. But all of these things are quite standard, and it's been around for over 10 years. Well, what makes it difficult to do anything on connected TVs? First of all, it's a bigger universe. I think technology, in terms of how it's evolving on larger screens, has seen its place about 50 years ago in broadcast TV. But when you come back to internet TV, you're changing things around a little bit where the consumer is used to the mobile device for internet TV, and now you're trying to bring them back into the broadcast area of a large screen device. And how do you see these connected TV advances? I'd like to categorize them into 3 different aspects. First of all, when you talk about the TV, you're talking about the playback. You're talking about how video plays on a large screen device using the internet, which is quite limited. The internet was not built for video streaming. It was built for a lower form of data. And how do you transfer 5 to 10 megabits of video content on large screens? This has been improving not just on the network side, but also on the TV and its devices itself, where the player on all of these TVs is, first of all, extremely fragmented from Apple and Android. It's been fragmented even more with Samsung and LG and Vizio and Roku. We're seeing a huge amount of devices. Fragmentation is how we're seeing it evolve and the necessity of evolvement in terms of playback in itself. Once you get playback right, you're talking about the performance. These devices are improving year on year. You're seeing a major upgrade of devices in itself. The hardware is what we're talking about. When we see the hardware improve on devices, we can do much more stronger things. Any software on any hardware is as good as the hardware in itself. This is a server technology and engineering that we're able to be aware of. But you're considering the screen size. You're talking about a remote control that needs to control interactivity with the device. You're talking about how you introduce new engagement with audiences, and for this, performance is improved. And finally, of course, what's been improving for the last 10 years is the streaming formats as well. We've seen Microsoft Smooth at one point in time, and today HLS and Dash are covering pretty much all of the work that you need to do on these devices. But then again, we need to consider the different formats of DRM that these providers need to have, and the functionalities that you need to support, subtitles, multiple audio. All of these things impact the video playback on connected TV devices. I'm going to be talking about each one of these advancements in technology so that you're aware of what you need to be considerate of when you're expanding and growing the opportunities for yourselves on connected TV devices. I'm going to start with a raunchy picture on a player so that I get all of your attention a little bit more. But when we essentially think about a little bit of a player, when we think about the player on each of these devices, Samsung, Apple, Android, as well as Roku, all of these providers have their own agendas in terms of how they want to control the video playback on these devices. And how do you actually introduce all of these things on these multitude of devices where, of course, and strangely enough, they are very different and it's understandable. But what else do you need to consider outside of the user experience when you're building applications, when you're building solutions for a connected TV device across all of these screens? We're happy that finally in the last couple of years, there's been support for a JavaScript or a singular player across all of these devices that helps us break fragmentation to a level that we can control it in terms of the effort that we put into it. We can control it in terms of the costs that people are not willing to invest in it. And that's where we come in with common technologies that you can build applications where one code fits all these devices, where a company like ourselves would not see the difference between an Android TV and an Apple TV, but we would acknowledge the fact that a user who uses an Apple TV would have an expectation of a native experience on these devices as well. When we look at the playback, we need to see the improvements and the progress that we've seen across the adverts, where, of course, we've been talking about the client side and server side. There are brilliant advancements in the server side, and there's reasons for you to do it. But if you're not able to track it, what's the whole point of playing advertisements on these ads? On these devices, when we have not just the adverts to track, we have to track the experience to make sure it grows. We can improve services to a level that the consumers watch more content on connected TV devices and the apps are downloaded and used simply because that's when our providers, the broadcasters, can make their money. And when we see the analytics improve, the streaming standards improve, because at the end of the day, people invest in technology when there's rate of return, and the ROI has improved considerably. And we've seen that over the last 10 years. And today I would say that the last point where the streaming standards was a huge issue 10 years ago is the least of our concerns today. And that's because the monetization is possible because of the technology improvements in connected TV devices. The second point was performance of these devices. We forget how important that it is, where even the device manufacturers are trying to reduce cost on hardware. We're going to the other side of the planet sometimes to make sure that hardware gets cheaper, which means that the performance is improved only when the hardware is improved. And with time, of course, the hardware has become superbly great, which means that we can do a lot of other things. When we talk about connected TVs, we used to also call most of them smart TVs. And what makes TVs smart? It's not just being integrated to the internet or to be able to stream on them, because that's not smart enough anymore. Of course, we called the phone smart at one point in time because it could do multitude of things. And what more can you do than playback of video content on connected TV devices? You can do some interactivity. You can have a lot of overlays that creates animation that allows you to engage your audience to the next level. When you engage an audience, you spend that much more time with them. And when you engage them, they spend more of the eyeballs that the advertisers want them to spend, which means that the monetization can happen without thought. And this is when I say that magic happens. And when I use the word magic, I want to take a little bit of time because I made these slides and I wanted some amazing animations on there as well, where I was told not to do any such things. So I said, put on a show. When the hardware is great, bring in the best of shows. And there's a little bit of a sound there from Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. And I bring this up because this is where interactivity can be done in a way that you would want to control. Consider yourself as a content provider, as a person who would decide what the consumer is watching and how they need to integrate and with the content in itself. When you think of content, there are so many different ways that you can interact with your audience, whether be it in real time, whether be it on live content and live shows, whether be it on video on demand content. Imagine watching this. You're just a passive viewer if you're watching a show, but I, as a broadcaster, can even communicate with you in real time with another poll. I can do a little survey. I can give you information. I can make you interact with me as a broadcaster to see what you want to be able to do. And no, I'm not going to tell you what time I'm going to be there tonight, but then again, If you want to have a drink, that's the place to be. But this is the kind of relevant information that one can provide to a consumer at any point in time to make sure that you interact in a way that the audience feels a part of the universe that they are in while watching content in itself. When you create something like this, you can recreate many other things. This is polling and voting. There's a whole lot of user experiences that you can create with audience engagement. When you have polling and voting in place, you can do surveys, you can do anything. You're watching content which is pretty much anything in the world, and you can interact with the audience. You can have surveys to see if they're enjoying what they're enjoying and they're watching. You can interact with them to see what they want to see the next day. You can simply interact with them to get their engagement in place so that you can consider your consumers an active audience. And that would mean so much more for your advertisers. That would mean so much more money for the CTV apps. When we have the interactivity in place, we need to make sure that it's accessible. One little topic about it is digital accessibility. It's a huge and important topic to a company like ourselves when we create user experiences. Digital accessibility is not meant for the handicaps, or it's not meant for people who can't hear or watch content in the simplified manner of it. What it is it's making it easy for you to watch content in a way that it's understandable. Just imagine that you're watching content and you can't hear something because you're in a pub, or because the volume function or your remote control isn't there. How do you use subtitles? Some people might argue that you don't want a different language for your audience, but maybe you need to hear English and read English as well. But what's the whole point of reading it if you can't actually read it? Accessibility is making small design changes, which is only possible if you can actually have such design changes be controlled by the technology available on these devices. Making sure that the UI UX improves is not a big deal, but it's improved over the last 10 years. But can it go one level higher where it becomes more relevant to the content that it's playing? When somebody's watching as simple as subtitles on a piece of content, you don't know who's saying what. And I think the idea is somebody who's using subtitles, it needs to be improved from a different aspect so that people actually understand, if they can't hear, who's saying what. And this is possible not just because somebody has thought of it from a design perspective, because the device in question also allows you to include a whole lot of animation and user experience on a device, which can be as new as 2023, as old as 2015. And some of these devices can barely play back content. How do you have overlays that can move around? This can only happen if the hardware is in place and the performance of the video content is in track. In terms of accessibility, it's existed for the last 10 years, and you've probably not noticed it. When Netflix changed their backgrounds from white to dark, it wasn't because they thought that dark is better than white. It's because when a large screen is played back, it's a more cozy experience for you to find, search content in a way, and you can read the metadata around it. They've changed the size, they've changed the design over the last 10 years, and that has set a pace for the rest of the streaming industry. But then again, you're seeing a whole lot of new players who are introducing what the new design on all of these apps are going to be. Now, design, UI, and UX is a huge topic by itself, and you'll have to come back next year for me to make a presentation on it. But I think that when you talk about design, there's so much to understand beyond design itself. If a designer or a product owner understands the technology, or the complexity of technology, whether it be it DRM, whether it be it the certification guidelines of a device manufacturer, which is vastly different in Samsung and LG, Apple and Android, which are easier on that side of the spectrum, and Roku has its own direction to go to. I think that when you start talking about the technology, you realize that there are so many categories of technology in itself. There is the player, depending on what kind of content that you need to watch and how it's going to be streamed, and the features that you have on the player like subtitles and audio. There is the analytics, which is essentially making sure that what you're watching is being tracked. The advertisers are getting the reports. The users know that there is some sort of reviews. And there is the UI UX, which is the last aspect, because if you cannot have the content counted for or accounted for, you're not going to have a good user experience, and it's not going to be valuable. I think when you think of all of these things, these are the three main points that I want to make across to anybody who is considering having a connected TV strategy. First of all, think about the player. integrate any player of choice. I'm not saying which player is important, which is not. You can take an open source player off the internet. You can take a fantastic player from one of these companies here in this booth. You can create a player of your own for the next 10 years. But the point is integrated well to make sure that when you have a player in place, it's actually doing the job, which is relevant to the video content that is playing in it. When you have analytics, which is the second most important thing, because you can watch a lot of content. If you don't know who's watching it, how much they're watching it, and the quality being measured, there's no point of it all. Again, in this floor, you see a multitude of those providers, whether it's QoS, the experience, the quality of experience is being tracked, the rating, there's ComScore, there's ComScope. There's a whole lot of providers that needs to be chosen for the needs of each and every streaming provider. But all of that needs to be aggregated, A, from a analytics point of view, and B, from a perspective that you can put together all of this information that makes sense to the consumer who's going to be evaluating the content that they're going to watch, and to the advertiser who's going to be spending money into this content. And of course, when you've got that right, you can think about how it needs to look. Some people like myself think I'm a designer, so I can do what I want, but if you don't have the technology in place, the integrations in place, and the community in place for technology, you're not going to get across a functional design that's going to work across all of these devices with the right level of investment on it. This is when I talk about the technology being the largest and most important aspect that people should understand in the smallest of ways. I think that when you talk about technology, I talk about a community. I think there is a community of device manufacturers that needs to be followed. And no, they don't need to talk to each other because they have their own goals and they have their own unique selling points. Each device manufacturer has a pro and a con. You need to figure out what you like, but you need to reach a consumer who might choose whichever device they want to be on. When you think about the community, you're talking about the forums that are provided by each of these device manufacturers. You're talking about each one of us. We are a Norwegian technology provider, and it's important to work with companies like us simply because we work with a whole lot of broadcasters, building such experiences and validating those apps across a multitude of connected TV apps. And I think that when we work together as a community, when companies like ourselves come together at NAB and speak like this, I think it's important for us to make sure that we think about standardization of technology. We talk about the players that's available for why it's good or why it's bad, making sure that we actually use the analytics, talk to the advertisers to make sure that they actually spend the money on it so that we can build better services. And that, for me, is a technology community that we can engage even non-technical people in there. And if you want to know more, we engage through the engineers that we have at Norigin Media. You can follow us on GitHub. We've got a lot of our own services and code. I'm going to go back a slide. And we have our blog on Medium. We have our own conference in Oslo in October. It's called Northern Waves TV. Look it up. I'll see you in Oslo. It's going to be just before the winter. It's not too cold. You don't need your coats. But we'll see you there when you can meet all of our Nordic broadcasters in one place and ask them any questions that you'd like. But for now, our team is here on the floor. And if you'd like to speak to anybody else, we're always here and available. Look us up. I'm going to say tusen takk, 1,000 thanks in Norwegian. And thank you for your time.